What's up guys, hope everyone is doing well. In this video I'm going to be going over some updates for XYO, but nonetheless, going to get it started here. First off, on the daily chart, I want to quickly go back over something that I pointed out almost right about 3 months ago pertaining to each of these arrows that we can see here, all of these pointing to yellow vector candles, which are indicating the increasing bullish volume. In other words, the movement is indicating a reversal from obviously going downwards towards the, and then going here, as you can see with each of these occurrences, towards the upside of these 3 or 4, depending upon how you look at it, instances. Whereas the criteria here is, we can see that this first one here was after this move of around, in total the bear market for XYO was around 97%, so around 96-97%. We saw this vector candle get printed. Let's fast forward here to the second and the third one. We can see that this was being printed, these two vector candles here, at least 70%. Overall, this move here was somewhere around pushing 80%. And then here with this last one of most recent, the yellow vector candle was printed right at the bottom of around an 83%, 84% drawdown right here, right within roughly the first week of April. Afterwards, we then saw XYO in a relatively short amount of time. So basically from the beginning of April to the end of April, 200% move up here to the approximate 2-cent range here. We can see with this horizontal has been a crucial resistance of more recently, going back to the end of last year, 2024. We can see that XYO was struggling here with this resistance, finally dumped all the way down into this yellow vector candle. Again, we saw this move. Now we've seen XYO coming down since late April, all the way obviously to the current time. Have not really seen any instances of promising breaking of this trend, where you can see each of these number of resistances here. As it's getting lower and lower, it's turning into wick resistance, such as here and here. I also think that there's potentially a reasonable connection to draw between this kind of arch, this build up here, where we can see a low and then a higher low, then XYO exploded. Obviously this is in proximity to the yellow vector candles. To me it looks at least comparable to some degree to what we're seeing here, where we're kind of seeing this like a form of double bottom with this ascending structure. Again, we're seeing yellow vector candle here. There's also been some more yellow vector candles. There's one right here and here. So generally it's kind of creating this zone right along here, which could very well, obviously this isn't foolproof, there's also one right here as well. So this zone right here, this could be indicating, such as past instances, is obviously if we go back and looking at each of these instances here beforehand, this could very well be indicating that this zone right along here is where XYO is bottoming out at, a zone to be accumulating in according to the vector candles and the trend and the patterns it's been showing. Obviously with that criteria of being them being printed after a 70% or more drop. So going all the way back to around basically same time, like late summer of 2023, so about 2 years at this point, we've seen again each of these vector candle zones here have been quite helpful in denoting the bottom zones, leading into further movement towards the upside. But at this point on the daily, it's going to be very crucial. Obviously, as I've already pointed out, this is a crucial resistance right here at approximately 2 cents. Whenever we can see daily candles close above this, that will likely be the early moments before we see XYO finally going back above here. So anywhere from around like 3.5 cents all the way up to here around 4.5 cents of the prior local highs of the last move. If we look here at the indicators, first the RSI, we can see that right now Bitcoin, or rather XYO here, is below the 272. It's gone down to the lowermost Fibonacci range here of the orange zone all the way down here at the bottom, which is the 137 to 197. And we can see, for example, going back to here and here, also here at the bear market, we can see that these likely are indicating, again, just another kind of low zone being met. Obviously at this point, like for example here, leading into here, XYO is continuing to trickle lower and lower. Obviously that could be the case, especially if Bitcoin's going to continue to go down, and it right now looking quite good in my personal view. I think it's going to have quite a nice explosive move over the next few months, but you know, obviously that could not be the case. Something could happen in the real world. You know, whatever may happen, perhaps a global catastrophe, some sort of black swan event, who knows? It could crash all of this out of view. But all things considered, with how the fundamental landscape looks right now and the positive aspects there, along with the chart data here, I think it's more likely than not we'll see XYO find some sort of a bounce here soon, correlating and lag obviously with Bitcoin. If we look here at these vector zones, the major one to point out is going to be this larger one here, which creates a range of around 0.006 up to around 0.072. So let's say, even if Bitcoin bounces over the next few weeks, we could continue to see XYO trickle down a bit lower and lag again. We see Bitcoin, essentially what would happen is you would see Bitcoin bounce, XYO continues to go down a little bit, and it's in that lag effect, and then it bounces later. So that's definitely a possibility. In terms of the lowermost vector zone, it goes all the way down basically to half a penny. I don't personally think that this would be met, and then this would act as a bounce, but it definitely is a possibility. Outside of that, moving here to this weekly chart, comparing Bitcoin and XYO. Again, this is a chart that I've been going over every so often whenever I put out these updates for XYO. We can clearly see that the peaks here, 1, 2, 3, 4, are correlated with Bitcoin. Again, we went from 64 to 69,000. This local peak here, which this was really kind of the rejection that solidified the bear market for Bitcoin back in 2022, around end of March, at around $50,000, which then led Bitcoin into the double bottom that it formed here going into the end of 2022. Again, we see our fourth peak here correlating with XYO's local peak here as it was in its accumulation zone. Again, descending support such as Bitcoin saw here. You can see that they bottomed out at the same time. Again, really what we're seeing here is, as I've said it plenty of times at this point, perhaps just beating a dead horse, but honestly I don't think it can be said enough. The fact that the altcoins are lagging behind Bitcoin. They run with Bitcoin in time. They may not perform as well. I mean, obviously, if you're looking here at the chart, one of the first things you could notice is that Bitcoin's had quite a strong structure here to the upside. It's already been in price discovery, whereas if we look here at XYO, it's not entered price discovery yet. It's kind of sitting roughly halfway in between the prior bear market, and a lot of the altcoins look like that. As I'll get to here soon, comparing, going over Ethereum, Cardano, Bitcoin, and XYO, which is something I went over in the last video, but I want to go over it again in this video to talk a little bit more specifically about XYO itself. But this bull market in general has been quite different for many reasons. I mean, if you look at the fundamental paradigms such as the ETFs, the growing global adoption and integration of blockchain solutions, and the acceptance of Bitcoin as a store of value, and even a reserve for nation states, we're continuing to see this adoption rapidly, exponentially grow. And I think it's something very important to keep in mind while we are in this period of, looking at the charts. A lot of things are changing. This bull market's been quite brutal in the sense that altcoins, again, like I've already been mentioning, haven't really been quickly and rapidly blowing up like they did in the past. And it seems to be kind of more gradual, more so. Even if you look at Bitcoin, this bull run here is it's been really gradual. It spent most of its time going sideways, for example, in these portions right here, than it has in these movements upwards. This bull market's been very characteristic of quick, short-lived movements towards the upside and longer time spent in corrective periods, those sideways instances where, for example, you look back here at this move for Bitcoin, it was just straight up, very little pullbacks. If so, they were just short-lived, quick spikes down, as like for example here, and then a move up, or even here, and then this larger move here from around 10,000 all the way up to 64,000 in a relatively short period of time. Again, comparing that to this current bull run, it's quite miserable and agonizing because it just, as this time becomes longer and longer, people begin to question themselves, question their investment, question what they're investing in, and just completely pick apart what it is that they're doing, and start to have all these negative thoughts and these emotions, thinking, oh, this is never gonna go up. I'm never gonna make the profit that I would like to make. It's just gonna die off. It doesn't seem like alt season's happening. But again, personally, I just don't think that's the case. I think we're seeing the fundamental structure of Bitcoin as it is maturing at this point, being around 16 years old. I think we're just entering the later, like the middle, roughly speaking, to later stages of Bitcoin's development, where we're going to start to see Bitcoin stabilize, such as For example, in the past, we've seen Bitcoin this have these quick and rapid parabolic moves, especially going back to the super cycle of 2012 to 13, looking at the 16 to 17 bull market. They just had more power behind them, more volatility. There were less extended pullbacks, again, such as we've seen here for Bitcoin of these three instances in comparison to now. And I think that that's obviously, as we're seeing, if we're looking here at XYO, it's translating into the altcoins, whereas we can see this drawn out, this gradual, borderline miserable, boring. It's just basically going sideways with this slight upwards bias. Whereas if you look back here, there was this double bottom period for XYO, but once it started going up and once it started exploding, as you can see right here, it was off to the races. It was very quick, very rapid, very parabolic. There were less extended pullbacks such as these orange periods here. You had this period right here for XYO, but I mean, that was really the only notable corrective period. You can see each of these further retracements here are short-lived pullbacks. Just they weren't extended as much, and they weren't longer-term downsides, such as, for example, this one right here, even the one that we have been in recently, that, as I mentioned, appears to be potentially making a form of double bottom. Now, if we zoom in here, again, I pointed out how this looks similar to what we're seeing here. This is the weekly chart, so this is going to hold a bit more weight than the daily chart. I think we're actually seeing something quite similar. You can see this kind of hump right here in the price of XYO. Again, the kind of pattern just kind of looks like this, where it's kind of this two local lows here, and then it finally bounces at that second one. Again, we see something I think quite similar right here, and I think we could potentially be seeing, again, a repetition of that pattern. Obviously, the market loves patterns. Humans love patterns. Psychological state also is very based upon patterns and behavioral cycles. And again, I think we could very well be seeing something similar. I'm not saying this is what we're seeing, but something to point out, I think, that could potentially end up being the case, assuming we see Bitcoin do well over the next number of months going into the end of this year, and XYO's actually going to also pick itself back up and enter price discovery, maybe perhaps something along these lines, where what we've been in so far for altcoins, here with the emphasis on XYO, we've been kind of in, we saw XYO bottom out right here, and then it entered this kind of initiatory phase that it's been in leading into the current time here, kind of like a build-up phase, like it's loading into its parabolic action. Like, for example, like just from this period here to this period here, we've seen the bar progressing to 10%, 20%, 30, 40, upwards towards 100%. And this potentially could be where we're seeing that loading bar finish, and we have been at this point building up all this pressure and this volatility, obviously with respect to lagging behind Bitcoin, if it is indeed reaching this final move here towards upwards anywhere from around 170,000 upwards towards 200, 250, maybe 300,000, maybe even higher. Who knows? Obviously, nobody knows where it's going to go. I mean, it could go far higher than I'm reasonably projecting, or it could go potentially to my range or lower. Only time will tell. But at this point, I think we are seeing the final moments of, obviously here with Bitcoin, which has been historically correlated with when we see the altcoins enter this parabolic price action, as I have laid out here. I mean, if we go back and look at the last instance of this in comparison of XYO to Bitcoin, we can see that Bitcoin was bottoming out here. When Bitcoin set this first bottom right here, XYO appeared to be kind of going sideways and finding support here, then it just had a major steep drop off. Then it found its bottom when XYO bottomed out in March of 2020. The really parabolic portion of the bull market began for Bitcoin here. We can see that XYO was setting its double bottom of an ascending structure here. You could also, again, kind of compare this here to what we're seeing with each of these instances. It's almost like an upwards tilted triangle, and we're seeing this one was smaller, then this one got larger, and this one's larger, and also we're seeing each of these moves here, 1, 2, and 3 for XYO getting larger and larger, which is why, again, it's almost like a volley, like a megaphone type pattern, where we're seeing this parabolic action, and as it's getting further and further within this parabolic channel here, we're seeing, because the upper resistance here is going to skyrocket at some point, we'll start to see these moves are going to have to catch up with that trend, and they'll be larger and more explosive and more volatile. Again, comparative to moves that we saw back here for XYO. We could see something with this next move, could be something comparable to this move right here back during the prior instance of XYO's bull market. Now, if we look here at this 2-week chart, this is a big chart that I want to go over. I haven't specifically gone over some of the aspects of this chart. First thing I want to point out here is, again, just kind of comparing. We see the brunt of the bear market here for XYO leading to the first bottom. We see this, again, like this upwards tilted triangle. We see the double bottom set, and then we see the bull market here in yellow. So basically what we're seeing here is in pink, the bear market, orange, accumulation zone, yellow, bull market. Again, obviously you can see here the rinsing and the repeating of the cycles. Again, behavioral patterns, human psychology. Obviously the market is very much so intertwined with that. It's not a closed system. It's an open system that is directly and intensely impacted by the behavior of human beings, which are really the life fuel of the market itself. If we didn't exist, obviously this would not be here. The assets wouldn't have been created by human beings, and the money wouldn't be here, you know, so on and so forth. And again, I think we are seeing right here, basically, again, just to point out this massive macro W pattern repeating here for XYO leading towards the upside. Now, looking down here at the RSI, I hadn't even noticed this. I noticed this recently. I drew this inside pitchfork here on the RSI a number of days ago, where we can see here from the lowest low up to the prior bull market high down to this bear market low of the RSI of the current or the most recent bear market. And we can see here that XYO has been in this uptrend of the RSI, which is obviously correlated to why the price is doing what it's doing here. You can see each and every single time that XYO has gotten into this lowermost zone down here at the bottom of the channel, this has correlated with crucial bounce points. So for example, here, 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 and then XYO recently just entered it once more. So if the pattern follows through, now, you know, just to entertain a little bit, there could potentially, depending upon how the market goes over the next number of weeks, going into the rest of this month into the next month, August, we could, you know, maybe see a deviation. Maybe we'll see the RSI go a bit below it for a period of time, but ultimately it'll bounce. That's not a big deal. Just because we may see this go below here for a bit doesn't mean that this structure is overall breaking. It could just be an anomalous deviation, which means the bull market is still intact for XYO. What's also interesting is if you connect each of these moves here, you can see there's this rough trend here, where this move here correlates with this move, the first move of the bull market for XYO. This second one here up to the trend on the RSI for the second move of XYO. And we see here this first leg of the current move that we're on. So we could see a bounce here back up to this trend line at some point. Obviously, it could definitely break that as well. But again, this is also a testament that we're kind of seeing this increasing megaphone-like structure, this kind of volley where we're seeing this structure diverge and broaden as time goes on, which is obviously, as I've already pointed out, correlated with larger, more volatile moves as the bull market progresses. Now it's going to be very important for XYO to get above this median right here. You can see that was the rejection point at 4.5 cents down into the downside we have seen of most recent. So seeing the RSI move back above the median here and continue to go higher and higher, especially above here, which is I believe that's the 236. That'll be important to see. If we look down here at the RSI, or the stock RSI rather, you can see that it's roughly kind of in this zone right here, which again has correlated with the lows so far throughout this entire period, where we've seen XYO bottom out here, and then it's been gradually building upwards, setting higher and higher and higher lows. So once we start to see this flip back into bullish, come back above this median here and cross that, that will be a good thing. For example, here we can see it happen, correlated with this move. Here it was correlated with the move up to 4.5 cents. I mean, going back even further, we can see that once it crossed here, this is correlated with this move here, leading into the second bottom of this double bottom, then led into this bull market. Now, if we look here at the MACD, you can see that it is at its lowest point since going really all the way back to around like January 2023. It's lower than it was back at around half a penny, which we're seeing some hidden bullish divergence here. Again, we're also kind of seeing the structure I keep pointing out, where we're seeing, again, kind of like a megaphone-like structure. The support here is a bit more horizontal, but again, we're kind of seeing this ascending structure like this, where if there isn't another MACD move towards the upside, we're going to see a larger move up towards this resistance, and it might even break it. Again, you can see it's essentially just how the MACD works here. We can see these larger and larger moves as the momentum is released. Again, we're kind of building up this pressure and this volatility. with what XYO has been doing really since this period right here. It's just been gradually grinding upwards, building upwards, kind of like a spring compressing and loading up, like I've already mentioned as an analog, up into the point where we really see all that pressure released in a parabolic bull market. Those euphoric times that alt season's known for, that has been agonizingly delayed multiple times, seemingly so, obviously, during this current bull run. Looking here at the RVI, we can see also that the RVI is more oversold than it was during the bear market lows. Similar thing happened back here as XY was leading into this low, then moved up to 4.5 cents. It's more oversold than some certain instances back here at around half a penny. So again, we're seeing some hidden bullish divergences here. One thing we have yet to see is the movement of the RVI above this blue line here. This resistance basically sitting at 60. We see, going back to the prior bull market, as soon as that happened right here, January 2021, this is literally right as XYO was in its earliest moments of beginning this major parabolic expansion during this prior bull market. So as soon as we see something along these lines cross the threshold of 60 and continue to go higher, I think that it will be indicative of, again, some sort of parabolic move where we're seeing all this pressure that's being built up released. Now finally here on the ASO, this oscillator here, comparing bullish to bearish sentiment, where we see the white line is going to be bullish sentiment and the black line is bearish sentiment, and I have these symmetrical triangles laid out here where we can see here, take them off, we can see the pressure here of the bullish to bearish sentiment kind of builds up in this convergent area, and you can see as soon as it breaks out here, it was correlated with the bull market of the prior bull market. And then we can see also what's very interesting here is the apex of this triangle roughly along these lines right here. So right here is right when we see the bearish sentiment take dominance over a long period of time, and that's when the bear market began. So again, we see here leading into the apex, we see the bear market initiation here. And after each of these bounces here, we can see here, obviously XYO, the price was going down for quite a time. The ASO with the bear sentiment line was going upwards, showing bullish divergence, leading into this bullish line moving into the bull market. We can see basically each of these times that the support of the triangle is met here. We can see that these bounces here are occurring for the price, and whenever the white line hits the top and goes down, we can see rejections for the price. So carrying that over here to the current triangle here, as we can see here that this support in the ASO triangle is correlated with this move here. Here was correlated with the most recent move to 4.5 cents, and then we're just lately we saw the ASO go back into the support zone, which again could be indicating that we're going to see a bounce here as we have each of these instances going all the way back to the beginning of this triangle. Again, just further, at least from my view, perhaps my bias is getting in my way and completely blinding me from seeing anything, but really, if I were to be honest, I don't particularly feel that is the case. Again, although I could be wrong. Just really, again, taking all things into consideration with how Bitcoin looks, the fundamental landscape with the tariffs having a pause, the reciprocal tariffs, a 90-day pause, obviously with the exception of China, as I've mentioned. Again, the growing adoption and exception. The fundamental landscape just looks so good. Even the technical landscape, despite how bad the sentiment is, psychologically speaking, within the vast crypto Bitcoin community, sentiment's just, terrible. It's been terrible for quite some time, and that's genuinely just because of how slowed down and almost decrepit like that this bull market has been, with like Bitcoin, as I said earlier, having this grinding gradual buildup where it's spent most time going sideways than it has with the parabolic volatile moves towards the upside. And again, a lot of people at this point are borderline ready to give up, which a lot of times that happens right as the sun is starting to break above the horizon and cast light upon whatever situation someone may be in. Lastly here, before moving into the last chart, again, we're seeing also with these bear markets here, same time period, the accumulation period is also roughly the same time period. I do think the bull market is going to be quite extended in comparison to the past bull market. I still think that the next move, obviously assuming that it does occur, assuming that XYO enters price discovery, and assuming that Bitcoin continues to do well over the next number of months, I think that more likely than not we'll see XYO move up into a range somewhere just testing the prior all-time high, so around like 8 cents or so. Potentially upwards towards, I think more reasonably as a higher extension, somewhere towards around 20, 21 cents, but potentially maybe, because XYO likes to wick a lot. I don't know if any of you have noticed this, but I mean, for example, I mean, we can look at this wick here, here, and especially going down, this one here, going down the lower time frames. XYO is very wicky. I also have a friend of mine who's been trading for like almost about, I think, 13 years or so at this point. Also has recently told me that XYO is very wicky. It's very volatile. When it starts to move up, it really starts to move up, which I mean, which you can also be seen here as indicative of each of these single candles that seem to have all the volume and the volatility packed into them, and it's not kind of like evenly spread out across a number of set of candles. But I do think that the next move will probably likely take us somewhere up in the green zone. And then, as I've been saying for months at this point, I think that potentially the highest, most reasonable zone is somewhere around 50 cents upwards towards like $2, $2.30 or so, maybe. Nice. It also could potentially go higher. XYO does have quite the low circulating supply, just at around 13 to 14 billion, somewhere within that range. So I mean, it could go in terms of the market capitalization. Because of that relatively low circulating supply, XYO could go far higher than the reasonable range that I have here, around 50 cents to approximately $2. But moving here into the final chart, we can see this is one of the final charts I went over in the Bitcoin video that I uploaded a few days ago, I think sometime last week. And what I was going over was just here comparing Bitcoin here at the top, and then we see here Ethereum second, third, Cardano, fourth, XYO. Again, the whole point of this chart here is to convey with each of these color-coded boxes, going from pink being the brunt of the bear market, leading into this next stage, the purple, or the kind of like the periwinkle color you see, where we can see Bitcoin enters it accumulation zone here, setting its double bottom. We see Ethereum here also enter its accumulation zone, setting its double bottom. And then we see Cardano, not particularly, I mean, it's still overall within the accumulation zone here, such as XYO had an accumulation zone kind of right here, which I mean really still extends to kind of where it is right now. So I mean, really same thing here for Cardano. Again, we can see here that each of these altcoins, again, Bitcoin's in price discovery. Ethereum, not into price discovery. Cardano is also not into price discovery. Again, XYO is not in price discovery. None of these altcoins, with some exceptions like Solana, have broken prior all-time highs and entered that price discovery stage. Ethereum really just looks wonky and ugly. I mean, it's kind of just going along this horizontal support here. Cardano looks more like Cardano looks more like XYO. Then those two look like Bitcoin or Ethereum here. Something that I pointed out as you seem to get from starting at Bitcoin, going to Ethereum, Cardano, and getting to more and more obscure altcoins, they start to look less and less like Bitcoin, and anything that's outside or more obscure than like Cardano looks more like Cardano than it does Ethereum or Bitcoin, as I mentioned. Now, I think clearly also, again, we're seeing these bullish moves here with each of these legs towards the upside, really with Bitcoin here. As I've stated many times, Bitcoin being the prime mover, it is the rock that you drop into a body of water. It does everything first. It sets the precedent. It sets the stage for everything else. And all the ripple effects, the ripple waves that emanate outwards, that diverge from that point that rock was dropped in as prime mover, are all the altcoins lagging behind in the wake of what Bitcoin does first as the principal, the top dog blockchain solution, where we can see here, as I mentioned in the last video, with a look at Bitcoin here, Ethereum, Cardano is kind of like the top three, the triad, so to speak, of the blockchain space. Now, perhaps, Solana is going to replace Ethereum, or some other coins going to replace Ethereum, or something will replace Cardano. But as of right now, I mean, really, I suppose I could extend this to the big four, a tetrad with Bitcoin, Ethereum, Cardano, and Solana, because Solana really does appear to be becoming quite a staple in the blockchain space. Obviously, that's also assuming that it continues to last over the next few years and decades, and continues to develop and actually provide genuine use cases for the real world. But overall, again, with this final move we're seeing here, as I pointed out in the last video, we could extend this. Really what we're seeing here is three main stages of the bull market. As I've pointed out, it's essentially just a five-stage impulse wave where we see the first leg, correction, second leg, correction. Now we're on the third leg leading into the fifth and final point of the five-stage impulse. It's just an Elliott wave pattern, which this is probably one of the best instances of an Elliott wave pattern that I think I've ever seen in analyzing a large number of cryptocurrencies and even looking at traditional markets, the stock indices and the stocks themselves on the indices. I think this is like the most textbook, again, just to reiterate, the most textbook five-stage impulse that I've ever seen. And again, you can see here from yellow to blue to green, we're seeing the altcoins follow along. Now, obviously, Ethereum here is kind of deviating a bit. It's going lower to this horizontal. They all have their own little, quirks and their deviations. But overall, we can still see that there's this general temporal trend lining up. And as long as Bitcoin continues to soar here and does enter further price discovery towards significantly higher highs, i.e. up to around at least 170K, 200, 250, maybe 300K or higher, then I do think we will see these altcoins here follow along. I do think we will see that alt season that everybody's been very patiently waiting for. It's been an agonizing wait for a lot of people. As I said, the sentiment's just been terrible for many, many months at this point because of how drawn out this bull market is and how long it's taking for altcoins to really explode. But the final thing I want to touch on in this video is, again, something that I touched on in the last video. I don't feel like can be said enough. I brought up, and I'll bring it up again here, the adoption curve of various technologies over, the last, couple of decades or so, spanning from like computers, internet, cars and things along those lines, transportation, vehicles, mobile phones, tablets, so on and so forth. All the technologies always follow a adoption curve, the S curve, where we see it kind of when it starts out, it kind of slowly and gradually builds up, and then it reaches that first major inflection point where it just starts to soar parabolically. And Bitcoin is in its early stages. As you'll see at the bottom right, it's still in its infancy. Blockchain solutions in general are still in its infancy. They may have been around for, at least Bitcoin, around 16 years at this point. A number of altcoins have been around for, maybe 5-10 years. Some of them, just a couple, 2 to 3 years or so. XYO, for example, been out since around 2018. I mean, the company and the people behind it go back further. XYO is the first decentralized, it's the first and largest decentralized physical infrastructure network and data oracle. And again, the focus here is the technology itself, the use cases that it can provide, and the adoption of that. Again, Bitcoin is still in its infancy, which means blockchain solutions in general are still in its infancy, and that applies obviously so to XYO. XYO, again, like I said, being a DePIN and a data oracle, I think is one of the better use cases, at least in the top 10 of blockchain solutions. Now, XYO isn't particularly meant to process transactions in the same way that Bitcoin processes transactions, in the sense of just, interpersonal transaction of value. Making day-to-day payments, payments on your house, or, whatever it may be. There's a plethora of, context for that. But XYO is more focused on data, which is obviously very important. As I've said a few times, that's very generalized data itself. I mean, data is everywhere. It's kind of the backbone of the society that we're in right now, this technological age we're entering. The singularity that's been talked about, could perhaps, according to some people, and analysts that are, informed within the realm of all that this is related to, projected that singularity is going to happen sometime around 2030. Maybe that does happen, maybe it doesn't. Obviously, with the boom of AI, that's going to be a big thing with blockchain as well. And XYO is something that is specifically related to AI. As a data oracle, it can make sure that the the data that we're using, the data infrastructure that connects, and again is another sense, a life essence of the structure that we as human beings, as societies, civilizations, within our own nation states and even intercontinentally across the globe, everything really depends upon data in a general sense. If the data is not trustworthy, if there's no integrity of the data, if we can't verify its truthfulness, if we can't verify, for example, with thinking about XYO as a collecting geospatial data and being relative to the shipping of packages, or just making sure to validate location-based data for like GPSs or anything else that needs to utilize location data and geospatial data. XYO is something that provides a solution to that. XYO is something that provides a solution in almost every single sector of the society we live in, spanning from, telecommunications and energy and logistics, all the way to more like the humanities, such as like it could be useful in politics for, like think about elections and voting and, validating the data of the person voting. Are they a citizen? Are they a felon? Can they even vote in the first place for X, Y, and Z reason? Are they actually, located in this state or located within a certain region in order for them to vote, here, or there? All the intricacies that go along with making sure that the information, really, again, data, information, buzzwords here, is where all this is centered with XYO, and that's going to be very important because XYO is something that is striving to validate the integrity, truthfulness, and trustworthiness of data and information itself. It's no different from you wanting to make sure that you can establish a relationship of integrity, trustworthiness, and truthfulness between you and your peers in terms of the information that you share with each other, making sure that you can confide in them and trust them as a person, such that you should be able to trust entities and institutions for their integrity as a collective unit when you are having to be a human being in the real world, doing whatever it may be. But that was all that I really wanted to talk about in this video. Again, lastly, just one, if I could give any piece of advice, focus on the bigger picture, the longer term of the technology itself, rather than the day-to-day, the hourly to hourly movements of the price itself in the charts that can be at many times so much emotionally disturbing, and just really kind of put things in the bigger picture in the perspective and thinking about the technology itself and how useful that this will, I believe, more likely than not be over the next number of decades as we start to see the genuine inflection point and explosion of the adoption of blockchain solutions as a revolutionary and paradigmatic step within humanity going forward. But all that being said and everything gone over, as always, none of this is meant to be financial advice, but I hope you all have a wonderful day.